Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to look at something you might have heard about, but probably don't fully understand, and it's called penetration testing. Now, I know what you're thinking. Penetration testing sounds kind of intense, but trust me, it's not as scary as it sounds. It's actually a pretty smart way to make sure you're safe online. So think of it this way. You have a house, right? And you lock your doors. You might have an alarm system, maybe some cameras, all to keep your stuff safe and sound right. But what if you want to go the extra mile, like next level security? Well, you might hire someone, a professional, someone who knows all the tricks of the trade, to try and break into your house. They would find all the weak spots before an actual burglar does. And that's kind of what penetration testing is. It's like hiring ethical hackers. The good guys in the cyber world, they basically simulate a cyber attack on your systems. They're poking around looking for those vulnerabilities before the bad guys can exploit them. And to help us understand exactly how all of this works, we have an expert with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great you're shedding light on this topic because, yeah, penetration testing is often misunderstood.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is a penetration test?
Well, in the simplest terms, it's like a controlled simulation of a real cyber attack.
Okay.
So these ethical hackers use the same tools and techniques as like the real deal, but with permission to find and identify weaknesses.
So they're like friendly hackers, kind of like those guys you see on TV. Sometimes they test how strong bank vaults are by trying to break into them.
Exactly. They're trying to find the cracks in the system before someone with bad intentions gets there first.
That makes total sense. Now, why would a company even want to do this? It seems like they're almost inviting trouble.
Well, imagine the alternative. You don't know about this vulnerability until it's too late and some hacker has already exploited it.
Oh.
That could mean, data breaches, financial losses, and serious damage to a company's reputation.
Oh, so it's like preventative medicine, but for your digital world?
Yeah.
Like you're finding the problems before they become major headaches?
Exactly. Penetration testing helps companies understand their security posture. You know how strong their defenses really are and where they need to improve.
Okay, so who actually does penetration testing?
Typically it's carried out by cybersecurity professionals, people with very specialized skills and certifications.
Okay.
They are experts in hacking techniques, network security, and vulnerability assessment.
So these are people who could be actual hackers,
Well, yeah.
but they're choosing to use their powers for good.
They're highly skilled professionals with, a strong ethical code. They work within, strict guidelines and always have the company's best interests in mind.
Now, you mentioned different tools and techniques. Can you give us some examples of what a penetration test might look like in the real world?
Sure. So let's say you are a company with an online store. A common tactic is to try and exploit vulnerabilities in your website's code.
Okay.
Something like SQL injection attacks, which could allow a hacker to access your database and potentially steal customer information.
Wait, so they could potentially get like people's credit card numbers and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's why website security is so important. And it's not just about technical vulnerabilities either.
Okay.
They might also try what's called social engineering techniques. Things like phishing emails to trick employees into revealing sensitive information.
Oh, wow. Those phishing emails, they're so tricky. I almost fell for one just the other day.
Yeah, that's why employee training is so crucial. A penetration test can help identify, weak points in your security awareness program.
I'm starting to realize how important all of this is. It's like a full-on security audit, but with a much more, I guess, hands-on approach.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about testing those defenses in a realistic way so you can be prepared for those real-world attacks.
Okay, you've convinced me. Penetration testing is definitely something companies should seriously consider. But is this just for like big corporations?
No, not at all. Every organization that uses technology and handles sensitive data is a potential target. It doesn't matter how big or small they are.
So even a small business with a simple website needs to be thinking about this.
Absolutely. In fact, small businesses can be even more vulnerable because they often lack the resources and expertise to implement really robust security measures.
That's a good point. It's easy to assume that hackers are only going after the big guys, but that's definitely not the case.
No, in today's world, everyone is a potential target.
This is really eye-opening. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of penetration testing, but I'm already learning so much.
Yeah, there's a lot more to explore, but hopefully this gives you a good foundation.
Absolutely. Now, I know there are different types of penetration tests, right?
Yeah, there are several variations depending on the scope and the target and the information provided to these testers.
Okay, so let's break those down a bit. What are the most common types?
One common distinction is between black box testing and white box testing.
Black box, white box sounds intriguing. What's the difference?
So in black box testing, the ethical hackers have very little information about the target system. It's like trying to break into a house without knowing the layout or even where the alarm system is.
So they're going in blind, relying on their skills and experience to find weaknesses.
Exactly. It's a good way to simulate a real-world attack, where the hacker has no inside knowledge.
That makes sense. What about white box testing? Is that the opposite?
Yeah, in white box testing, the testers are given a lot more information about the target system, network diagrams, source code, user credentials, you name it.
So they have like a blueprint of the house and maybe even a key to the front door.
That's a good analogy. It allows them to focus on specific areas of the system and test for vulnerabilities in a more targeted way.
Okay, so black box is like a real-world attack, and white box is more like a comprehensive security audit.
That's a good way to think about it.
Now I'm guessing there's more to it than just those two types.
Okay.
Yeah. There are actually a few other variations. Another common one is gray box testing, which kind of falls somewhere between black box and white box.
So they get some information, but not the full picture.
Exactly. It's a good compromise between realism and efficiency.
Okay, so we've got black box, white box, and gray box. Are there any other types that we should be aware of?
Well, there's also internal and external penetration testing.
Internal and external, what's the difference there?
Internal penetration testing simulates an attack from inside the organization's network.
So it's like someone who already has access to this system, like an employee.
Yeah, it's a good way to test the strength of your internal security controls and identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited by a malicious insider.
That's a little bit scary to think about. What about external testing?
External penetration testing focuses on systems that are accessible from the outside world.
Okay.
Your website, email servers, firewalls, anything that's exposed to the public internet.
So they're trying to break in from the outside, like a hacker sitting in a coffee shop somewhere.
Exactly. It's a good way to assess your overall security posture and identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited by anyone with an internet connection.
Okay, so we've got black box, white box, gray box, internal and external. That's a lot to keep track of. But I'm starting to see how each type of test provides a different perspective on your security.
That's right. The type of test you choose will depend on your specific needs and concerns.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
No, definitely not.
Okay, so let's say a company decides to do a penetration test. What happens next? Walk us through the process.
Well, the first step is to define the scope of the test.
What does that mean exactly?
It means deciding which systems will be tested, what kind of attacks will be simulated, and what the goals of the test are.
So it's like setting the ground rules for the ethical hackers.
Exactly. You need to make sure everyone is on the same page and that the test is conducted within, legal and ethical boundaries.
Okay, that makes sense. What happens after the scope is defined?
The next step is to gather information about the target systems.
So they're doing their research, kind of like a detective building a case.
Exactly. They'll use a variety of techniques like scanning for open ports, looking for vulnerabilities in software versions, and even searching for information about the company and its employees online.
So they're trying to find any weaknesses they can exploit.
That's right.
What happens once they've gathered enough information?
Then the real fun begins. They'll start trying to penetrate the target systems, using the techniques that we discussed earlier.
So they're actually trying to break in.
Yes, but remember, they're doing it with permission and with the goal of finding vulnerabilities.
Right, of course. So what happens if they find a vulnerability?
They'll document it carefully, including, how they exploited it and what the potential impact could be.
So they're keeping a record of their every move.
Exactly. This information will be used to create a detailed report for the company.
Okay, so they're not just breaking in and leaving things a mess. They're actually trying to help the company improve its security.
That's right.
So what happens after the penetration test is complete?
The ethical hackers will deliver a report to the company outlining all the vulnerabilities they found, how severe they are, and recommendations for fixing them.
So it's like a roadmap for improving their security.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've learned what penetration testing is, why companies do it, who does it, and what the process looks like.
That's a good summary.
This has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I'm finally starting to understand the world of penetration testing.
It's a fascinating and important field.
Before we move on, I just want to ask you a question that's probably on a lot of our listeners' minds.
Sure.
How much does a penetration test cost?
That's a great question. The cost can vary widely depending on the scope of the test.
Okay.
The size and complexity of the target system and the experience of the testers.
So there's no set price tag.
No, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Okay. So if a company's considering a penetration test, they should probably shop around and get quotes from a few different providers.
That's good advice. It's important to find a reputable provider with experience in your industry and a strong track record.
And I'm guessing it's worth the investment, right?
Absolutely. Think of it as an insurance policy for your data and reputation.
Okay.
The cost of a penetration test is far less than the potential damage of a data breach.
That's a compelling argument. I think our listeners are getting a real sense of how crucial penetration testing is in today's, digital world.
It's essential, and it's constantly evolving as new threats emerge.
Speaking of emerging threats, what are some of the trends you're seeing in penetration testing? What's on the horizon?
One major trend is the increasing use of automation. Hackers are using automated tools to scan for vulnerabilities and launch attacks, and ethical hackers are using automation to, speed up their testing processes.
So it's like an arms race, but with code instead of weapons?
Exactly. Another trend is the growing focus on cloud security. As more and more companies move their data and applications to the cloud, penetration testers are increasingly focusing on identifying and exploiting, those cloud-specific vulnerabilities.
So it's not just about securing your own servers anymore. It's about understanding the security implications of the cloud platforms that you're using.
Precisely. And we're also seeing a growing emphasis on social engineering.
Okay.
Hackers are getting more sophisticated in their phishing attacks. And so penetration testers are having to, up their game to stay ahead.
It's a constant cat and mouse game.
Absolutely. But it's a game that companies need to be playing if they want to protect themselves.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of penetration testing. I feel like we've covered so much ground, from the basics to the emerging trends.
It's a fascinating and constantly evolving field.
It is. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll dive even deeper into the world of penetration testing. We'll talk about some real-world examples, the legal and ethical considerations, and what companies can do to prepare for a penetration test. So stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. We're continuing our deep dive into this fascinating world of penetration testing. Before the break, we were talking about all the different types of penetration tests, and you know how they work. But now I want to get into some real-world examples to help our listeners understand how this all plays out in practice. Can you share some stories about penetration tests you've conducted, maybe some interesting vulnerabilities you've discovered, or some unexpected challenges that you faced?
Sure. One case that comes to mind involved a financial institution. They wanted to test the security of their online banking platform.
Okay.
And they were particularly concerned about account takeover attacks, where a hacker, gets access to a user's account and steals their money.
That's like a nightmare scenario for any bank.
Absolutely. So we conducted a black box penetration test, simulating a real-world attack from the perspective of an external hacker.
So you were pretending to be the bad guys, trying to break into their system.
Exactly. We started by gathering information about their online banking platform. We looked for vulnerabilities in their website code, tested their authentication mechanisms, and even tried to find employee login credentials on the dark web.
Wait, you were looking for stolen passwords?
Yeah, it's a common tactic used by real attackers, and unfortunately, in this case, we were able to find some employee credentials that had been compromised in a previous data breach.
Oh, no. So you were able to actually get into the bank system using someone else's login?
Yes. It was a sobering reminder that even strong technical security measures can be undermined by human error.
That's a really good point. It's not always about hacking into the system directly. Sometimes it's about exploiting human weaknesses.
Exactly. And once we had access to the bank's network, we were able to move laterally, exploring different systems and looking for vulnerabilities that could allow us to, take over user accounts.
So you were basically acting like a thief inside the bank, trying to find the vault.
That's a good analogy. And in this case, we were able to find a vulnerability in their account recovery process that would have allowed us to reset a user's password and gain access to their account.
Wow. So you could have potentially stolen money from someone's bank account?
Yes, it was a serious vulnerability that could have had a significant financial impact on the bank and its customers.
So what happened next? Did you tell the bank about the vulnerability?
Of course, that's the whole point of a penetration test. We document the vulnerability in detail, including, the steps we took to exploit it and the potential impact it could have.
So you're not just trying to break things. You're actually trying to help them fix the problem.
Exactly. Our goal is to make their systems more secure.
That's reassuring to know. What did the bank do after they received your report?
Well, they took our findings very seriously and immediately implemented measures to fix the vulnerability. They also strengthened their security awareness training for employees to, prevent similar incidents from happening again in the future.
So it was a wake-up call for them, but they took the right steps to improve their security.
Yes, they were very proactive and responsive, and that's what we hope to see from all our clients.
That's a great example of how a penetration test can help an organization identify and address, those critical security vulnerabilities.
Can you share another example? Maybe one from a different industry?
Sure. I recently conducted a penetration test for a healthcare provider,
Okay.
and they were concerned about the security of their patient data.
That's a sensitive area for sure.
Absolutely. They were particularly worried about the risk of ransomware attacks, where hackers encrypt sensitive data and demand a ransom for its release.
Those ransomware attacks, they seem to be everywhere these days.
Yes, they're a growing threat, especially for organizations that handle sensitive data, like, healthcare providers. So how did you approach this penetration test?
Well, we started by conducting a thorough assessment of their network infrastructure,
Okay.
looking for any weaknesses that could be exploited by a ransomware attacker.
So you were trying to think like a hacker, like how could you get into their system and encrypt their data?
Exactly. And unfortunately, we were able to find a few vulnerabilities that could have been exploited.
What kind of vulnerabilities?
One issue was that they hadn't properly segmented their network,
Okay.
meaning that a hacker who gained access to one system could potentially move laterally and access other systems, including those containing patient data.
So it's like having all your valuables in one room with a flimsy lock on the door.
That's a good analogy. Another issue was that they hadn't implemented multi-factor authentication for all their sensitive systems.
That's surprising. Multi-factor authentication seems like, such a basic security measure these days.
You'd be surprised how many organizations still haven't implemented it.
So what happened after you discovered these vulnerabilities?
We reported our findings to the healthcare provider and made recommendations for how to fix them.
What kind of recommendations did you make?
We recommended that they segment their network to prevent lateral movement,
Okay.
implement multi-factor authentication for all sensitive systems, and strengthen their backup and recovery procedures
Okay.
to ensure they could restore their data in case of a ransomware attack.
Those sound like some sensible precautions.
Yeah.
Did the healthcare provider follow your recommendations?
Yes, they were very receptive to our findings and implemented our recommendations promptly. They also implemented a security awareness training program for their employees to help them identify and report suspicious activity.
That's great to hear. So they were able to strengthen their security posture and reduce the risk of a ransomware attack.
Exactly. It's a great example of how penetration testing can help organizations proactively address security vulnerabilities before they're exploited by, those real attackers.
These real-world examples are so insightful. They really highlight the importance of penetration testing in today's threat landscape. But I know there's more to it than just, finding vulnerabilities. There are also legal and ethical considerations, right?
Absolutely. Ethical considerations are paramount in penetration testing.
Okay.
We need to ensure that we're conducting these tests responsibly and within the boundaries of the law.
So you're not just breaking into systems willy-nilly.
No, definitely not. We always have a written agreement with the client that outlines the scope of the test,
Okay.
the rules of engagement, and the confidentiality of the information we gather.
So it's all very above board and transparent.
Exactly. We also make sure to comply with all applicable laws and regulations.
That makes sense. Now, what about the legal implications? Are there any laws that govern penetration testing?
Yes, there are several laws that apply, including the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or CFAA, and the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA.
Okay.
These laws prohibit unauthorized access to computer systems and data. So it's crucial that penetration tests are conducted with the full knowledge and consent of the target organization.
So no rogue hackers breaking into systems without permission.
Exactly. We always obtain written authorization from the client before conducting any testing activities.
And you mentioned confidentiality. How do you ensure that the sensitive information you gather during a penetration test is kept secure?
We take data security very seriously.
Okay.
We use encrypted communication channels,
Okay.
secure storage for all data,
Okay.
and strict access controls to ensure that only authorized personnel have access to, sensitive information.
So it's like you're handling top secret government documents.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
We treat all client data with the utmost care and confidentiality.
That's reassuring to know. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about what companies can do to prepare for a penetration test.
That's a great question. The first step is to define your goals.
Okay.
What are you hoping to achieve with this penetration test? Are you trying to identify, specific vulnerabilities, assess your overall security posture, test your incident response capabilities?
So you need to know what you're looking for before you start looking.
Exactly. Once you have a clear understanding of your goals, you can start working with a penetration testing provider to develop a scope of work that meets your needs.
So you need to find a reputable provider who can tailor the test to your specific requirements.
Yes, that's important. You also need to make sure that you have the right people involved in the process.
Okay.
This includes your IT team, your security team, and any other stakeholders who have a vested interest in the security of your systems.
So it's not just an IT project, it involves the whole organization.
That's right. Security is everyone's responsibility.
Okay. So you've defined your goals, you found a provider, you've assembled your team. What's next?
The next step is to gather information about your systems. This includes network diagrams, system inventories, software versions, and any other documentation that can help the penetration testers understand, your environment.
So you're basically giving them a blueprint of your house.
Exactly. The more information you can provide, the more efficient and effective the penetration test will be.
Makes sense. What else do companies need to do to prepare?
It's also important to establish, clear communication channels.
Okay.
You need to make sure that the penetration testers have a way to contact you if they encounter any problems or need to escalate issues.
So you need to be available to answer questions and provide support.
Yes, it's a collaborative process. You're working together to achieve a common goal, improving your security posture.
This has been incredibly helpful. I feel like our listeners have a much better understanding of what penetration testing is, how it works, and what they need to do to prepare for it.
It's been my pleasure to share these insights.
We're going to take another quick break here, but when we come back, we'll continue our deep dive into penetration testing. We'll talk about some of the challenges and limitations of penetration testing, what companies can do to remediate vulnerabilities, and what the future holds for this, evolving field. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring this world of penetration testing. We're uncovering its importance in today's digital landscape. We've learned what it is, why companies do it, and even heard some real-world examples. But now let's get even deeper. I'm curious about the limitations of penetration testing. Is it a foolproof way to guarantee security?
That's a great question. Penetration testing is a powerful tool, but it's not a silver bullet. It's just one piece of the cybersecurity puzzle.
So what are some of its limitations?
Well, one limitation is that it's a point-in-time assessment.
Okay.
We're testing the security of a system at a specific moment in time. But what about tomorrow? New vulnerabilities can emerge at any time. Software updates can introduce new weaknesses, and hackers are constantly developing new attack techniques.
So it's like taking a snapshot of your security posture. It might look good today, but things can change really quickly.
Exactly. Another limitation is that we can't test everything. The scope of a penetration test is usually limited by time and budget. We can't possibly explore every nook and cranny of a complex system.
So there's always a chance that you might miss something.
That's right. And we can't account for every possible attack scenario. We're simulating attacks based on known vulnerabilities and techniques. But what about the unknown unknowns? There's always a chance that a hacker could find a new and creative way to exploit a system.
So penetration testing is a valuable tool, but it's not a guarantee of perfect security.
Exactly. It's important to have realistic expectations.
Okay, so let's say a penetration test uncovers some vulnerabilities. What happens next?
The next step is to remediate those vulnerabilities. This means fixing the weaknesses that were identified.
So it's like patching the holes in your fence.
Exactly. The specific remediation steps will depend on the nature of the vulnerability.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. If we find a vulnerability in a web application, we might recommend, updating the software or implementing a web application firewall or strengthening input validation to prevent, things like cross-site scripting attacks.
So it's about making your systems more resilient to attacks.
That's right. If we find a vulnerability in a network configuration, we might recommend, segmenting the network or implementing intrusion detection and prevention systems or strengthening access controls.
So it's a multifaceted approach.
Exactly. It's about layering your security defenses.
Now, I'm curious about the future of penetration testing. How do you see this field evolving in the years to come?
That's a great question. I think we'll see a few key trends. One trend is, the increasing use of automation. As systems become more complex and interconnected, we'll need to rely more on automated tools to help us identify and exploit vulnerabilities.
So it's like using robots to help us find the cracks in the walls.
Exactly. Another trend is the growing focus on cloud security. As more and more organizations move their data and applications to the cloud, we'll need to develop new techniques for testing, those cloud-based systems.
So it's about adapting to the changing landscape.
Yes. And finally, I think we'll see a growing demand for penetration testers who have specialized skills.
Okay.
For example, we'll need more testers who are experts in mobile security or Internet of Things security or even artificial intelligence security.
So it's a field that's constantly evolving.
Absolutely. It's a challenging and rewarding field.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the world of penetration testing. I feel like we've peeled back the layers of this often misunderstood practice and revealed its importance in today's interconnected world.
It's been my pleasure to share these insights.
For our listeners who are eager to learn more about penetration testing and other cybersecurity topics, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We regularly release new deep dives exploring all the latest trends and insights. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay secure.